We'll give it a few minutes as we see participants starting to join us here. Welcome to the second panel of the Journalism Creators Summit. Hope you all enjoyed the first one. I found it super fascinating. I had to jump off a few minutes early to open this room, but super interesting learnings. So welcome back, everyone. We'll give it a minute or two to get us started here. So to everyone who's joining, this is the second panel of the Journalism Creators Summit. We are basically going to talk about what creators in the journalism space need to become sustainable, what resources we can provide, what support networks we can provide, what the needs are of this community, both in the US and internationally. So that is a topic that I know we all are passionate about. So thanks everyone for joining. I see people are still dropping in here. Good to see that. And we'll slowly get started, I think. So let me introduce our panel. I'm very glad to have them here. All of them have plenty of experience with the creator economy, have plenty of experience with, working with journalism associations and helping them become more sustainable. So I'll start by introducing the group, and then we'll do the first round robin. So I'll start with how I see them in the order on my screen. Anika Anand. Anika is the Deputy Director at Lion, and in this capacity, she helps local media organizations on their path to sustainability with plenty of resources available at Lion, and I'm very glad to have her here. And she also has an experience as an entrepreneur herself, so I think that will also be a super interesting conversation. Welcome to Pauline Tillmann, who's based in southern Germany. She's an entrepreneur herself, DEINE KORRESPONDENTIN, so your correspondent, a network of female correspondents. And she's an alum of our Entrepreneurial Journalism Creators program here at the school. And she also graciously helps other entrepreneurs and media organizations on their path to sustainability. So I'm excited to hear more about that later. Welcome, Paulina. Lillian Ruiz is wearing many different hats, and all of them are exciting. She's co-founder and managing director at the National Trust for Local News. Basically the newest and I think probably most impactful thing that has been started to really save local news in the United States. And today she's also here because she wears a second hat. She's a part of the steering team of the TinyNews collective, and another association that has made itself, dedicated itself to helping tiny newsrooms, which is exactly what we're talking about today. Graham Watson-Ringo is the Senior Director of Member Strategy at the News Revenue Hub. And as the name says, News Revenue Hub, they're all focused on helping news organizations generate revenue, become sustainable, organizations of all sizes. And Graham worked with a lot of organizations of various sizes to help them on their path to sustainability. And she's also an alum of our executive program here at the school. So very good to see you again, Graham. And last but not least, Julia Bain. Julia is at Facebook Journalism Project and one of the people there who made it possible that this event happens with sponsorship, and a supporter of many of the entrepreneurial initiatives we and others in the field are doing. She's also the mastermind behind Facebook's new initiative, the Bulletin program that really serves the creator economy. So I think that's something that we're excited to hear about. How has that been going? So without further ado, I welcome everyone here. You all can use the chat. Please feel free, if you just joined us, to introduce yourself in the chat. Some of you might have done that in the last panel, but I know several new people joined us. So if you want to just share who you are, where you're from, what you hope to get as a creator or someone in the creator economy from that panel, we'd love to have your comments in the chat, and also feel free to drop any questions you might have in the chat as we are discussing here. We'll try to address them. We'll do a first kind of 30-minute like conversation, and then we'll have some time for audience questions. So please keep them coming either in the chat or the Q&A. Enough talking from me. So I'll start to invite our fantastic panelists to talk about support in the creator ecosystem. And hey, Jeremy, I'm seeing our colleague Jeremy joining us here as well. Hey, Jeremy. So I'll start with Lillian, and I'll start with Lillian and ask her, what do you think from your work, both with the Trust for Local News, but also in the TinyNews collective? What is your experience? What are the needs of these creators that you keep seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I come at this question from two directions. One, as someone who's been in the entrepreneur seat and, felt that heat quite a bit. And in the second frame, as someone who thinks about how to, identify and invest in hallmarks of long-term success. So I think a lot of those hallmarks sort of fall under the category of dull but important. So what needs to fuel a creator economy? I think of it as almost like fulfilling the Maslow level needs. Does the creator have their basic needs met as a human being so that they can have the space to think about being a creator and then of being of service to their community? So, making sure they can get their gas mask on first. So I think on the micro level, that ranges from, I, the creator, I need an ecosystem that invests in me monetarily, that has pathways for, intellectual and operating support for my stage of development, and that there are resources in the form of, just other human beings to work with me and free me up to do what I do best. And then I think on the macro level, for those of us who are building programs or building tools or providing monetary support, it's that question of, how do I, the ecosystem player, provide those tools, and more importantly, sort of access capital programs to a creator at these critical junctures before they burn out. I think a lot of times there's been historically a requirement to wait for the creator to burn out as a sign that they've hit their milestone. And so how do we provide those critical supports sooner so that we can actually, create that rising tide that is really going to keep that creator developing and keep the ecosystem and the economics of the ecosystem, sustainable as a whole. So that's my long-winded answer.
It's an awesome answer. And I really love that you brought that kind of human perspective into that answer and that resilience perspective, because I think it's sometimes overlooked as we talk about resources. Thanks, Lillian. Anika, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, a big +1. And actually at Lion, we're really lucky to have worked with Lillian as a coach in one of our programs, also with Graham. And I think both of their backgrounds speak to exactly what Lillian's talking about, building the fundamentals and really making sure that the entrepreneurs, the aspiring entrepreneurs we're supporting, as well as the existing news publishers, have those fundamentals down pat. So I think there's kind of two big buckets of needs that I see. One, of course, capital, money, but it's almost too easy to say that. So I'll be a little bit more specific. I think, particularly for aspiring news entrepreneurs, the ability to test an idea and get enough financial runway to make a real go of it. A lot of folks are who have started have had to keep some sort of income on the side, and also build this thing from scratch at the same time. So I think it's really interesting what Substack tried recently with their Substack fellowship. They received nearly 1,000 applications and selected one person to receive a $100,000 grant, and then I think 9 others to receive $25,000. And I think that's smart and it's a good start. And I'm curious actually to hear what they learned from that. And then, of course, beyond capital, I think, again, coming back to, helping aspiring entrepreneurs with those necessary skills to lay the fundamentals. And the biggest need we see there is around this category of work that we call operational resilience. So everything from being able to create a budget, manage a budget, hire and retain staff over time. And as Lillian mentioned as well, manage burnout and prioritize your time. So those are a lot of things that we're trying to focus on as well at Lion.
Amazing, Anika. And thanks for sharing, and thanks for bringing up that money isn't everything perspective, because I feel that that's sometimes kind of an easy thing to turn to, like, let's solve everything with money. And I think we all agree that this is not the only approach. So thanks for sharing that. Julia.
Yeah. And thanks so much for having me. It's been great to be here. For us, it's been really interesting, right? Because Facebook has been a place that creators and writers have come to kind of share their work and connect with audiences for some time. But for us, it's really been about figuring out how we can add even more value to that. And so now with Bulletin, writers are actually able to build their audiences through those distribution methods and those community engagement features. And they can actually now, build those audiences up on and off platform, and they can monetize their work as well. And for me, it's been really, really interesting, just as we've, been building this up since launch, to see just the variation in knowledge with the writers that we've been working with across the board when it comes to entrepreneurship. Some really have a basis in that and understand, the business side, and others are really still learning. And for us, it's really been about, okay, how can we help fill in some of those gaps? And that's where I've been spending a lot of my time, is on building out those programs. And we've been kind of thinking about it in 3 buckets. The first is really about, okay, how can we provide access to expertise, experts that can help fill in some of those, business knowledge gaps. And then secondarily, right, how can we build up community and create an ecosystem where writers can learn from each other? Because it can be kind of lonely when you're writing on your own. And we want to create an environment where people can connect with those that are in the same stages that they're in. And then the other piece of this is really thinking about services and support that writers can access from third parties, because these are things like design services to create great logos, and legal services from experts, because it can be a really heavy lift to figure out where to start and kind of navigate that environment. And so we're putting things in place to make that piece easier. So for us, at the end of the day, it's really not about making money through Bulletin. It's about helping creators make money through Bulletin. And that's how we're measuring success. And, from my perspective, it's what are the services that we can put in place to help make that happen and help deliver success, not only to those writers that have a background in entrepreneurship, but those that are doing this for the first time, so everybody can thrive.
That's awesome. Thanks, Julia, for sharing that. And I think what's super interesting, and I'll pass it to Graham in a second, because I think that's kind of a nice pathway there, is that need for kind of development and training on kind of the business, revenue, sustainability, marketing, and so forth side of things. When you are a journalist and you just never were taught to do those things, right? You're really good at the journalism, but that's only part of being a journalism creator. And making it to sustainability. Graham, do you want to share some of your experiences there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. A lot of the entrepreneurs that we're seeing now, a lot of the people who are starting up in the creator space, they're journalists. I'm a former journalist, and most journalists would say they're really terrible at math. And so trying to start a business, trying to balance books, trying to understand a budget, is got to be just unbelievably daunting. When your craft is in the words, not in the money. Traditional journalists who have been around a really long time say we don't deal with the business side of it, right? We only deal with the journalism side. There's a big separation of church and state there. And so now, as we enter kind of this new evolution of journalism, and we're seeing the journalists themselves take control of their own destinies and their own futures and really creating in this space, it's so important to support them with that kind of training and with the kind of tools that will make these things a lot easier. At News Revenue Hub, we really are working toward creating tools that make that transition easier, make that transition sustainable. Creating tech stacks that put everything together so you don't have to. Those types of things, and then also providing the education. How do you engage an audience? How do you create, if you're a nonprofit, how do you create a membership program? How do you make money? So there's a lot of things that go into it that when you first say, you know what, I'm done with the major journalism world, I'm going to start my own thing. Yeah, that's all well and good until you actually have to put it into practice and understand that, are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to go get a 501c3? All of these things, you're like, whoa, I just want to do the journalism. Well, it's not that simple. So I think the ecosystem needs people like all of us here who can support them and give them all the tools and all the resources and all the years of experience that we've all had to help them along that journey, because this is the future of journalism. These smaller upstart local news organizations are really what is going to push journalism forward, and all that we can do to be there for them in whatever way possible is so important right now, especially filling in those educational gaps that they just didn't get while they were doing their normal day jobs.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, Graham. And I really can just from my experience second that this learning journey is sometimes so long and so steep and just needs help. It's very hard to kind of teach yourself all these things just by yourself. And the loneliness, I think Julia mentioned that before, right? The loneliness is real as well for creators. That's I think why we are seeing this need to kind of convene. Pauline, one of the kind of main points of the entrepreneurial journalism creators program that we do here at the school is that aspect of like convening and that aspect of kind of forming like a community. Can you talk a little bit about, how that was helpful, but also how you kind of, both as a creator and someone working with other media entrepreneurs, what you think are the most important resources?
Yeah, thank you very much, Anita, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. And of course, I can most of all speak about the German media ecosystem. And for instance, I interviewed different people in this field for a white paper in March. So a couple of months ago, for example, the founder of the membership platform Steady, Sebastian Esser, and also Tabea Ježić, who was also in my first cohort, who founded Unbiased the News, and I identified their different needs. And most of all, according to my point of view, there's a need for individual coaching. So I think there's no one fits all solution, and journalists who want to become a media entrepreneur need a reliable coach, most of all, according to my point. So this coach, like I did this in summer, Kickstart coaching with a podcast called Was mit Medien, something with media. And we had 8 fellows and I showed them like how necessary tools like user surveys, business model canvas, audience funnel, minimal viable product, and so on. And after 3 months, they could decide if they could go further in this approach and apply, for example, for getting access to an incubator. There are some of them in Germany, or make it on their own. So I'm addressing most of all the pre-seed phase. And I think there's a huge lack of information, of business knowledge, of resources, and also of networking, to be honest.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Pauline. And I think it's interesting. So for me, who's someone who works with a lot of people in other parts of the world, not just the US as well, it's always so interesting to see that this trend and the needs, they might differ in different parts of the world, but the general tendencies are very similar, right? That need for connection, that need for helping someone to coach and mentor you through that journey, the need for like knowledge and learning about sustainability, the business and marketing side of things, and that need for kind of a tech stack to help you kind of get started in a sustainable and affordable way. I mean, that's so interesting to see that this is like the need in Singapore, it's the need in the US, it's the need in Germany. And that's something I'm very excited about as well, because I feel we can be very powerful if we join together these forces here, right? So I'd love to hear. So that was awesome, and I very interesting. I'm also seeing we have the first kind of questions in the chat, and I'm collecting them, and we'll get to a first round of questions soon. But I briefly wanted to ask you: you're all doing so many things for that ecosystem. If you had to think about what is the most, like from the things you offer, the support things you offer, what are the most kind of successful and, in your thoughts, the most impactful ones? What does your organization, the organizations you're associated with, what do they offer in terms of support and in terms of whether it's training or whether it's tech stack and so forth? Graham, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I mean, currently the News Revenue Hub, we work around coaching in audience development, membership, and then we also have an integrated donation management software system. And that works with, right now we work with 70 partners, and We've helped them raise more than $42 million to date. But right now we're actually working on something that can reach a wider swath of entrepreneurs and actually entrepreneurs or legacy, depending on your needs. And it's a tech stack that combines Stripe and MailChimp. It will allow for mobile payment options with Google Pay, Apple Pay, all those things, basic MailChimp integration, best practices on reporting and benchmarks, all these things that a startup would need and would have to probably cobble together on their own, all in one package. And we're calling it the news revenue engine, and it'll launch in the summer. And I think it's really going to open up an opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs to find a competent tech stack for a really low price. I mean, we're actually rolling it out for free. We're a nonprofit. So our goal is to see journalism thrive. So, our initial package comes out for free, and it will do so many things, and and then you can add on to it as you get more sophisticated. And I think that just the technological aspect of it is so key to get off on the right foot in that space and not have to worry about, oh, I have a spreadsheet over here, I have another spreadsheet, how am I going to put all this together, and have that all done. And then if you outgrow it, you can pick it up and take it someplace else, wherever you want to go. And we are happy to have you do that. Our goal is to make sure that you are successful. And so if you find that success with somebody else, then we have packaged all of your data all nicely, and you can take it with you. So we're really excited about this product. We're really excited about the future of it. And the possibilities. Right now we have that same similar integration with Salesforce, also added in addition to Stripe and MailChimp, and then it just creates a way to have renewals and best practices, have welcome series, be able to keep track with your donors and be able to have that ongoing communication with them. So I think establishing that rapport is a big part and goes a long way towards your ultimate sustainability and learning those best practices.
That's awesome, Graham. And it's interesting that now, so first of all, thanks for giving us that sneak peek into what's coming relatively soon as the next big thing. It's interesting that I'll say friendly competition, or the more the merrier, that several of you are kind of working on tech stack related things as well. And I'll probably ask Lillian next to share a little bit about TinyNews kind of approach to this.
Yeah, sure. So TinyNews, it really sits at the intersection of technical tools and strategic support for first-time creators, with the goal of eliminating the time and the stresses associated with entrepreneurship. And that really goes back to what I was saying before about supporting creator entrepreneur sustainability. With TinyNews, there have been so many conversations about skills training. What kinds of skills training? Is it strategic? Is it technical? And there's a whole component about, and I'm sorry, my New York windows are very thin, so if that's what you're hearing in the background, apologies. There might be some sirens as well. But that conversation of skills and training, it's both developing training for frameworks that'll help you in the long run. What are the frameworks for creating strategy, for understanding mission and values, and making sure that that's a holistic baseline so that you can create a business that's sustainable to those mission and values, as opposed to creating, a Frankenstein business and then trying to glom on values on top of it. So really starting from those skills around strategy and then plugging that into your operations, your tech stack, your documentation, how you think about your resources. And the idea is, with TinyNews, kind of building a holistic platform and set of programs that work with first-time journalist entrepreneurs to do that. Hopefully it'll open up the field for creators and expand the creator ecosystem, because suddenly it's, a lot of things that are typically gatekept, whatever, no longer are for those first-time creators. So you start to see, I think, a flexibility in who can see themselves as a creator. And I think that that's something that's a really valuable set of supports and systems, and a slightly different way about thinking about tools. So that's been really exciting to be a part of and to see that start to come to fruition.
I love that, Lillian, and thanks for bringing that aspect of like accessibility, but also kind of, you know, inclusion into that conversation, because that means that suddenly, you know, the potential of everyone playing an active role in that journalism creator ecosystem. It's actually one of the things that makes me very excited about that space, and makes me think that we can really, you know, have impact by supporting that space. So thanks for sharing that. Anika, some of the things that Lion is doing and that you're doing with Lion also are, you know, somehow intersecting with some of what Graham and Lillian talked about. Do you want to share some of those?
Yeah, and you know, first and foremost, we definitely see ourselves as part of, which is very exciting, a burgeoning ecosystem supporting independent news entrepreneurs. You know, just a few years ago, none of this existed. So I think it's really a testament to the interest in the space right now, and how we're all collaborating with each other. Just as an example, you know, we have our startups boot camp that we've launched in partnership with GNI, and CUNY's doing a similar creators program. And so Anita and I have shared notes on that and learned from one another's experiences. And it's been awesome to have that sort of collaborative spirit. So want to acknowledge that, because I think that is a positive step forward in a way that the journalism industry has not always been so collaborative. But at Lion, we offer three main benefits. So first, you know, we think about training and professional development. So I mentioned the boot camp, and we've run one of those in the US so far, graduated 24 businesses from that. We're going to run another one in Canada. The applications are actually due November 14th. So that's going to be coming up soon. And then you know, by the end of those programs, we will have launched about 65 new news businesses by mid next year, which is really exciting. To Lillian's point of accessibility, it's just so important to give folks who are starting out really clear first steps and pair it with the coaching as well. I think someone else mentioned the importance of that too. And what we prioritize in our training and professional development is all those non-editorial things. So I used to call them the business things, but there are so many things that fall into that category. So, you know, it's everything from product thinking to audience development and growth to back-end operations management, budget and financial management, all of those things. So we're really prioritizing that in our training and development. The second thing that we offer is membership. So right now we have about 400 members across the US and Canada. And all the training in the world can't replace hearing from others who have been through it or who are in it now, you know, advice from them and support, and you know, a real sense of camaraderie that we're all in it together. So we have our news entrepreneur community, which we've grown from, you know, 0 to more than 700 people now, who are regularly asking and offering advice to one another. And then we're also continuing to develop specific benefits that can help, you know, our membership collectively, like the media liability insurance that we recently launched, and then also access to pro bono legal help. And then the final piece of what we're working on is we really want to make sure that we're helping individual people through their independent news business journey. But we also want to be helping grow and mature the industry at large. So, you know, we published this Project Oasis database of more than 700 local news publications, independent news publications across the US and Canada, and this research report charting just the growth of the industry. So we plan to keep updating that so folks have a sense of the landscape. We also publish a podcast that features news entrepreneurs' stories. And then the last piece that we're really excited about focus on next year are our sustainability audits. So we're thinking a lot right now about how to redefine the industry definition of sustainability, and make it a little bit more holistic to include things, you know, like burnout and hiring and retention, and does your staff look like the community that you want to be serving, as well as things like how much money is the bank, and, you know, how much runway do you have. So those are kind of the three main categories of things that we're focusing on, and we've learned a lot, and we still have a lot more to learn.
Thanks so much for sharing, Anika, and fantastic that you, aside from sharing the resources, also brought in that collaboration aspect, and that, you know, many of the players in this ecosystem are way more collaborative than it was traditionally kind of approached. I think it speaks for itself that I, like all of these fantastic women on that panel, that I work or encounter them in various like capacities, and that there is like this growing ecosystem of collaborators that make that movement stronger, which I think is fabulous. So thanks for bringing that up. Julia, do you want to share a bit about Bulletin and the specifics of that program and what else is Facebook is doing in that space?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, runway was mentioned. For us, really, it's about providing runway to sustainability. And so that writers have the time to figure out, you know, their voice on the platform. They have time to figure out how to build their audiences on the platform. And then they have time to build and monetize as well. And, you know, a lot of what we've been putting in place is, you know, things that will help them, you know, do what they do best, which is creating meaningful content. And we're helping, you know, help them find and engage with the right audiences and to make money. And so a lot of the perks, those kind of third-party perks that I mentioned earlier, are really designed to help do that. So, you know, coaching was mentioned earlier. That's something we believe wholeheartedly in. In terms of the kind of business expertise side of things, we have been working really closely with Dan Oshinsky, former newsletter editor at the New Yorker and at BuzzFeed. He's been a fantastic resource for our writers, both in terms of a one-to-one coach and then also providing just some guidance overall on some of the basics around how do you design a paid strategy? How do you launch a publication with a consumer in mind and promote it effectively? So that's been great. And then we've obviously worked with you and with Jeremy very closely to provide a version of the entrepreneurial journalism program specifically for our local writers, because we felt like, you know, an experience that would foster community over a longer period of time would be tremendously beneficial. And that's been really important. And then, you know, some of what we've been doing has really been geared more towards the editorial side. And we've provided access to Getty Images, for example, so that writers can use rights managed images in their work and kind of up-level their content that way. We also have offered logo design through a graphic design firm called Top Hat, which really breaks it down into kind of easy to use. The whole design experience is really easy to use, right? They produce a logo and they also create some assets that are really easy to use with marketing on social and within their publication as well. And then we're doing some work as well on the legal side. So writers have access to resources there. Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press has been a great partner to us just in terms of providing educational resources and access to their hotline, which is great as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, Julia. And I think it's a nice pathway to Pauline to basically talk a little bit about, is that everything that you heard from that panel here so far, does that also resonate to like the European market that you're working with? Are there different trends of what's needed? What are you or the organizations you encounter offering in terms of support for that network?
Yeah, thank you, Anita. I just wanted to underline that I'm a journalist who became media entrepreneur 6 years ago. So I'm not part of an organization, but I founded DEINE KORRESPONDENTIN, and I'm an individual who offers coaching for upcoming media entrepreneurs in the future, even more for local media projects. And perhaps I can tell more about the entrepreneurial journalism program that you mentioned also earlier, that is led by Jeremy Kaplan and you, and also Jeff Jarvis came by one or another time, and we had really excellent speakers. And I just wanted to give you a glimpse into what we were talking about there. So we were having sessions about opportunity exploration, about product development, about growth, and also about personal leadership. And there was, for example, Aria from the Membership Puzzle Project, who will also be part of the summit later on, who I'm personally really a big fan of the project and also of Ariel. And we learned so much about strategy, about building a team, about introducing collaborations, about improving your own product, that I cannot summarize it into a few sentences. But for example, for DEINE KORRESPONDENTIN, for my digital magazine that I'm leading, these 100 days online course were super important and a super booster to head into a viable future for our media business. So in terms of the revenue streams, we explored new ways of getting money. And for example, at the moment, I'm working, we had like this year, we had three exhibitions, our first exhibitions with our stories, and I'm right now working on a book project. So yeah, I think this program was super important for our media startup, but also like I'm trying to give these expertise into the German media ecosystem. So there's a huge like for that, as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for sharing. And I think one of the amazing things about that panel and everything that you all shared is there is this kind of spirit of paying it forward and like the network effect of things. And I think that's real, right? If I see the conversation that's going on right now in the chat, I see people are talking about their own startups and creations and newsletters, but they're also saying, oh, please post yours, I want to subscribe to that. So, and then I feel like everyone working in that space is kind of, has the spirit of collaboration, which I think is awesome because it just supports sustainability so much more than just the competition angle. So thanks all for sharing that. I'll invite the audience again to post questions. I already collected some that were posted in the chat, but if you have any questions for any of the panelists, feel free to drop them either in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be happy to address them. I'll start with the first one, and whoever kind of wants to say something about that on the panel, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. Diogo Rodriguez from Brazil, hey Diogo, is basically asking about collaboration, but kind of from the other perspective. Like, he has an explanatory journalism project, and he'd love to learn more about how a small outlet can partner with larger like groups or entities. And obviously now none of you work right now at larger groups, media groups, but many of you did, right? So any thoughts that you can share about, what a small media entrepreneur, how they can kind of collaborate or partner with larger media organizations, or is that kind of in vain, that approach? Should they just partner with other entrepreneurs? Yeah, Lillian, I think, wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a starting stab at it. I've definitely worked with startup media outlets that have, gone and solicited much larger partnerships, with the Atlantic and so on. A lot of that hinged on almost treating it like a sales process in some ways, starting to build the relationships with, whatever key departments, whether it's an editorial collaboration you're looking for or sponsored content. And it can take a really, really long time, and sort of approaching it with the same level of kind of business development that you would for any sort of sales partnership that you would approach. The other thing to keep in mind is that being the smaller entity, being really well aware of what your boundaries are and what you're sort of willing to give up creatively, where things don't fit into your strategy, and just making sure that your entity is being compensated in ways that make sense for you, whether that is monetarily or not. Making sure that your organization can really get something that helps to move you forward. Otherwise, these partnerships can become really extractive, especially because you are so committed to the work and to really getting that story out. So just really finding that balance without veering into paranoia, but then also maybe sometimes being lightly paranoid. So that's my starting shot on that one.
Awesome. I like the lightly paranoid one. That was a great answer, Lillian. Anika.
Yeah, just a big +1 to that, and not even necessarily for other partnerships with larger journalism organizations, but just other larger entities in a community where you may share similar people in your audiences. My biggest takeaway from personal experience and seeing other folks do this too is that there is this initial inclination of, if they just mention our name on Twitter or throw out the name of our publication into their newsletter, lots of people will see it and we'll get all those people signing up for our product. And that simple visibility is not enough. So some of the most successful, growth that we saw was really, to Lillian's point, strategic collaboration, saying, hey, we want your email list and we want to be able to email all the folks on your list with a link saying sign up for our newsletter here, or doing some sort of list exchanges. So again, yeah, just being super, super intentional about it and treating it like a business transaction, and making sure that you don't think that visibility in and of itself is enough.
I love that, Anika, and it's such a good point, and it builds on the work you do, and many of you all do, on redefining what impact means, and what, if reach is not what we are talking about anymore, what is impact for a niche creator, right? And I feel that's also why why we and many others in that field redesigned the educational programs, because it's just different if you work in a gigantic publication where reach is kind of the main way of measuring success. Whether, if you're a small creator, success means something very different for you in terms of covering your communities and serving your communities. We do have some more questions, and I'll make sure that we get to them. And again, I'll invite everyone on the panel to just raise their hand if they feel like answering them. One is really, and I think we can answer that quickly in a round. Can creators outside the US and Canada access any of the resources you all talked about? And I'll maybe just start by saying the creators program at the Newmark J School is very international. We have, I think, people from 40 different countries or so far. So yes, that is all available for internationals as well. I don't know, Julia, do you want to talk about Bulletin briefly?
Yeah. So at this point, we are in a beta phase. I think our last creators launched like last week. So we're very much in test and learn. I think that I don't have exact dates to share at this point, but I mean, I think it's safe to say at some point international will be on the roadmap for us. And I think a lot of the resources out there are things that transfer internationally.
Awesome. I assume, Anika, Graham, and Lillian, that most of the work that News Revenue Hub, Lion, and TinyNews are doing is somehow focused on the US and Canada. Is there anything that any of the resources or offerings that you have that are also open to internationals? Anika?
I'll just drop in the chat really quick a link to our startups playbook. So we wrote the most comprehensive thing we possibly could have in terms of how to launch a new startup from A to Z. And I'm sure there's still more that we can put in there, but we wanted to make it easily digestible and accessible for folks. And so we are continuing. I know it has been translated into a couple of different languages as well. And we're continuing to treat that as a living resource. So we're adding more case studies from around the world. And we hope that, that documentation is a good starting place for folks.
Awesome, Anika. Graham.
Yeah, so for us, our consulting services are available to anybody. We do kind of these sprints, these classes where you can take 8 weeks with us and, get your SEO practices down, get your, if you happen to be a nonprofit, build a membership program, learn about CTAs, any number of things that will help you progress. Unfortunately, our tech stack is just US and Canada. At this point, and that's an issue with Stripe and just the different players that we use to build the stack. But all of our consulting services and things like that are definitely available to anybody, anywhere.
Very cool, Graham. Thanks for sharing. And I did not know that, so I learned something. Pauline.
Yeah, Jeremy already mentioned the handbook that I worked on with Deutsche Welle Academy. So I was project manager in former times for DW Academy, and I recognized that this boom of entrepreneurial journalism is not only going on in Germany, but also in the global South. So we had case studies in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and we talked to many successful media entrepreneurs like Maria Ressa of the Philippine startup Rappler, or Laura Sommer of the fact-checking organization Chequeado in Argentina. And there you can find many helpful learnings. They shared with our authors, and I was also one of the authors, and wrote together a chapter with Kirsten Hahn about Asian media startups. And I think this might be helpful also for you for getting started. but also
Awesome.
when you are, when you did start to get more tips and more learnings in terms of building a team and all that.
Yeah, and Will, by the way,
it was translated into, it's in English and it was translated into Spanish and Arabic. So yeah, we're really excited about that.
It's all in the chat. We're also gonna save the chat and make it available, so all these links are not lost. Lillian.
Yeah, unfortunately, TinyNews Collective is not available outside of the US currently. It's still very much in its early beta stages. And the resources and programs that are a part of it are specific to collective participants. But there are ongoing efforts for language accessibility and so on. So hopefully there will be, future updates on what that looks like over time.
Awesome. Well, so we all have something to do in terms of like internationalization, but that's great. That's great that we have that. I want to make sure that we have time for a very interesting question that reached us from Jikanda Johnson. There are a number of BIPOC-led news organizations and content creators doing great work that face a set of challenges that our white peers do not face. How are your organizations addressing those challenges? And I think that's a really interesting question. I would probably, in the sake of time, since we have about 10 minutes left, just throw it at Anika first. And then from there, yeah.
Hello to Jaquanda. Jaquanda's on Lion's board and offers valuable perspectives all the time for the work that we're doing. And this has actually been a huge takeaway from us in this past year of running multiple programs. And the way that we approached programming initially, because Lion really has just started ramping up its programs in the last 2 years, is trying to address all entrepreneurs' needs. And so, often in the same way that we talk about, audiences, serving journalism with them, let's just get the people the information. And then through those programs, we've learned just how differently the needs are specifically for folks from historically marginalized communities or historically underrepresented communities. So just one example, we had a participant in the program say, hey, all of this membership stuff and, reader revenue strategies are great, but the community I'm trying to serve can't afford that. So what else do you have for me? And I think it's important to really listen to those questions and make sure that our programming is responsive to the specific needs of the entrepreneurs, of the communities that they're trying to serve. So the approach that we're taking next year actually is a bit more of a case management approach. I'll have much more to say about this as we flesh it out more, but it's really starting with the individual and their needs, and then figuring out how to scale from there, rather than looking at broad trends and designing programs from there. So there's always a balance. We want to help as many people as possible, but we want to make sure that help is as impactful as possible as well.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing, Anika. And maybe to just briefly also share something from the Newmark J School perspective, since obviously that's something that we are, spending a lot of time thinking about. I think what we learned is that it is super important to deliberately build programs and experiences that center people of color and communities of color. And some of the programs that we are doing, so for example, right now, we're doing kind of a custom cohort of the Entrepreneurial Creators Program together with Media in Color in California. Only with people who serve underrepresented communities and communities of color. And some of the programming is identical, right? But some isn't. Some of the coaching and mentoring and some of the topics and the prioritization of topics is different. So that is actually something that I think everyone who kind of designs training programs or cohort-based experiences has the responsibility to do if they take diversity, equity, inclusion seriously. I don't know if someone else on the panel wants to. Yeah, Lillian.
Yeah, one thing that is really interesting about the design at TinyNews is that, because we're working with really the top of the funnel when it comes to the creator ecosystem, we really tried to be very intentional about thinking who is coming through that funnel. How can we make sure that it's as welcoming and as open and as wide, so that we can start the process with a really diverse ecosystem before kind of getting so far down the line that we've created something where there's no programming. So the idea with these, having such a diverse start is that with this initial group is to be able to take those learnings and bring them in from the very, very beginning. And that's very much a part of the TinyNews mission, is to widen that funnel as much as possible. So I think if you design your programs with that intention and really approach it with that level of intentionality, it can start to really change what's even sort of considered in that long tail of program development. So that's how we're approaching it in the short term.
It's very smart, Lillian. And I think the intentionality paired with something that could be called user-centered design, right? Or community-centered design in a way, because ultimately I think that's the mistake that maybe was, made too often in the past, of saying, oh, I think we know what these communities need, which sometimes is not the case if you don't have that lived experience of the community. So thanks for sharing that. Anyone else on the panel want to build on that? Pauline.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think also, for example, at legacy media, workshops for product development is super necessary. I think this will get even more in the future, but this was also a need that I identified talking to players in the field. And also in terms of local media projects, I think there's a huge need. For example, right now I'm working for an online for Correctiv on an online tutorial about community journalism, and there are so many underserved communities, but also like information deserts in local regions in Germany. So I think in the future that also local media projects are having having a good time, the golden age of journalism, to start their own thing, because there's so much need for that.
Thanks for sharing, Pauline. Graham.
Yeah, in the same vein as like Lillian and Anika, I think that initially when News Revenue Hub started, there was just kind of like, here's our playbook and this is the playbook we're going to shop to everybody. And I think as we've watched media evolve and the creators evolve and the needs change, when we're no longer, it's not newsletters, we're sending out text messages instead, because we're trying to meet the communities where they are. I think we've had to adjust as well. We've had to adjust, our teachings, how we're trying to help people, make revenue and create programs and, even calls to action, things like that. And, it's been a great learning experience, especially over the past year. And I think Anika said the same thing. Of really trying to take a step back and saying, okay, this is not a one size fits all kind of situation. You really have to sit there and analyze where the organization is coming from and what their needs are and what the needs of the people they're trying to attract are, and then really adjust what we do to fit that space. And, so it's really about listening more than it is about telling people what they need to do and telling people who they need to reach out to and the processes to do that. It's really about listening and understanding, and then us going back and kind of huddling and saying, okay, what can we do to make this an ideal situation for this particular client? And so it's been really kind of enriching to see us do that, to be agile in that way. To not be so rigid with the playbook that has worked for us. And that's been part of our evolution as well. And I think, down the road, it'll serve all sorts of different creators, of all walks of life. And that's really exciting to see.
That's awesome, Graham. And I think it reminds us of one thing that I think we sometimes forget, that this is kind of an iterative development exercise. And we're all talking about startups and entrepreneurs here, right? It would be fundamentally weird if we didn't pivot and try to improve over time and our offerings over time. But I think sometimes one forgets that, right? So I feel it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be bad to keep learning, right? It's just bad if you don't want to keep learning and are like, okay, this is what we offer and we are not going to pivot and we are not going to iterate on it. So thanks for bringing that point up. I feel we all sometimes need that reminder. Julia, of both the bulletin programs, but also the other initiatives, how is Facebook Journalism Project tackling the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion as it decides who to fund and who to work with and what programs to offer?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great one. We have been thinking really hard about making sure that we have a diverse group of writers that we're working with on many fronts, across disciplines, across topics, across focus areas, and that's something that we're going to continue to invest in. Hi to Jaquanda, she's actually a bulletin writer, and I actually wanted to kind of weigh in on that question as well, because we have actually worked with ICFJ on a training program, an application-based training program, specifically for underrepresented communities and creators to help build their brands. So that's something that we have, that we're really proud to have worked on and to stand up. And I'm going to drop it into the chat too, because I think that to that point that has been made earlier, it's really important for us to take our training programs and figure out how to optimize them and develop them further.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's crazy because I think we could, I could do that for another hour or so. I feel the chat is also still going strong, and questions and conversations, but we need to wrap to make sure that you all get on the panel, get back to your kind of day jobs, and that everyone else here can jump off to the next session. My colleagues are sharing the links in the chat, both for the next session that we are having and to the summary doc that has all the fantastic things that are coming up in the next few hours. So please join us there. I want to thank my fabulous panel here. I knew when I invited you to this, I knew it would be inspiring, but I kind of seriously, that was a lot of multitasking, because I also took a lot of notes of smart things you all said and resources you all shared. So I'm very grateful for your active engagement in that creator ecosystem. I'm grateful that you could be with us here today. And thank you all for being so transparent and so open and so supportive and sharing all the resources. I'm sure all of you would be happy if someone reaches out to you or your colleagues at your organizations. I think the chat was a bounty of information, and very glad to have you all as collaborators in the creator ecosystem. Thanks, everyone. And keep in mind that we are moving on to another session, a link that you have posted in the chat and that Jeremy and my other colleagues posted in the chat. And thanks everyone on this panel, and we'll end that recording and that Zoom here, and recordings and the chat transcript are going to be made available most likely early next week to all participants. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you in the next panel. Bye.